Hello everyone, and today I'd like to talk about a very interesting topic, and it's about how can prayer actually heal you. And so let me continue with my discussion of James Nestor's book, The Breath. And so we talked about the experiment that he was doing where he chose only to breathe with the mouth. And in chapter 4, he goes on talking about increasing lung capacity and the 5 Tibetan rites by Peter Kelder, and how Kelder met another person, Colonel, in 1930s, and how he learned those stretches from the monks and how to extend his lungs, physical, mental health, and even lifespan. And a 70-year-old longitudinal study in the 1980s, as well as a 2000 study in the University of Buffalo, both showed that a bigger lung corresponded with longer life, and lung capacity actually decreases as we age. But, for example, it goes down 12% from 30 to 50, etc. Before we thought that there's nothing we can do, but then now we know that it is actually changeable, and we can change our size of our lungs. We can actually stretch it so that they don't stiffen. Katherina Schroth was actually able to cure her scoliosis and expand and straighten her spine. It even helped others with similar conditions do the same and even helped them breathe better. She then spread it throughout Germany and got awarded by the government. And the author also wanted to see how this worked. So he went to an apartment to a woman named Lynn Martin, who was taught about the principles of deep breathing, of expanding your lung capacity, by another person, Carl Stough, who was really a choir conductor, and he explained the power of a full exhale. He in fact helped his singers sing better by fully exhaling, and he did that in many places, and eventually became so famous and renowned that he was even asked to train emphysema patients at a hospital in New Jersey in 1958 to fix their emphysema through proper exhalation and to properly use their diaphragm, because these emphysema patients had a diaphragm that wasn't working properly. He helped them breathe and even walk. And the X-ray results did actually show that their diaphragms restored to normal and their lung capacity increased. And so, and then in 1968, he worked with Olympic athletes and helped them win 12 gold medals and 5 Olympic medals, like world records, without the need of supplemental oxygen. So he trained the American team, the US team, and helped them win without the need of oxygen, which everybody else used. So they outperformed everybody else without the need for supplemental oxygen. And so Lynn Martin actually used these strategies with the author. And later in the experiment, Olson, so the other participant in the experiment, told the author about the importance of another molecule, carbon dioxide, which most of us see as toxic, for example, greenhouse gases, but he showed that it's actually more important than oxygen. And the author actually previously trained with Olson, actually a year before the study, in Stockholm, Sweden, and Olson told the author about how his dad breathed really fast and how that increases blood pressure. He got lung disease and he died at 68. So by breathing so fast, he was exhaling all the carbon dioxide. And Olson then studied breathing and the problems that arise and how to prevent them, because his father died and he really wanted to learn. So he had these medicine textbooks, this physiology type of textbook, biochemistry, right? And so he learned that the best way to prevent disease is to have a balance of these two gases. And the best way is to inhale and exhale slowly. So this is what this chapter 5 is about. It's about slow breathing. And air actually moves via tubes and bronchi, which eventually move to bronchioles, and then these tiny alveolar sacs. And oxygen goes from the alveoli to the red blood cell and into the blood. The red blood cells have hemoglobin, and they take in the oxygen and pass it to hungry cells and tissues, while carbon dioxide makes the opposite journey to the lungs and gets exhaled. So we have 25 trillion red blood cells, 270 million hemoglobins, and so literally there's a billion oxygen molecules per hemoglobin. because each hemoglobin can carry it has 4 sides for oxygen. And what's even cooler is that he points out in the book that breathing out CO2 is the best way to lose weight. In fact, 8.5 of every 10 pounds of weight loss actually happens by breathing and not by sweating or perfusion. So also notes that if we have enough oxygen, in fact, right, breathing more will not give us even more oxygen, right? But this lack of CO2 is a problem. We don't want to exhale all of it. And Christian Bohr, right? You've probably heard of Bohr and how he studied this relationship. What he did is he drew the blood of animals and exposed it to a variety of gases. And he showed that the more CO2 an animal has, it was able to literally loosen the oxygen from hemoglobin, so there's better delivery of oxygen to the tissues. And this is sometimes called offloading. So it literally helps strip the oxygen away from the hemoglobin. And that's why hungry cells actually produce more CO2 and get more oxygen, because they literally, by producing more CO2, what happens is that there's a better delivery. There's also an attraction of blood vessels. So there's like a vasodilating effect that happens, and there's a better offloading to those hungry tissues. That's why the hungry tissues that produce more CO2 get more oxygen than other tissues in your body. And rapid and stressful breaths that are heavy actually remove all the CO2. And we saw in Patrick McCowan's book, it causes breathlessness and more difficulty breathing. And that's exactly it. You actually get less blood flow to tissues. And that can lead to lightheadedness, cramps, and headaches. And I want to point out that Wim Hof breathing, actually it's fast and rapid breathing. I'm not against it, but it has the same effect, because you breathe so fast, you feel lightheaded, crampy, and you may get headache, right? You feel dizzy, because that's what happens. Now, that's more like a physiological stress to your body. So I don't mind doing 10 minutes of Wim Hof breathing every day. In fact, that's good to wake you up. He points out it's good for your immune system, and that specific method of Wim Hof breathing is good, even though it's heavy breathing. But I wouldn't recommend to breathe like that all the time. So I just wanted to make that consideration. The way you should breathe normally is more like the way that Patrick McCowan and James Nestor mentioned, slow nasal breathing. That should be your day-to-day breathing. If you want to do 10 minutes of 20 minutes of Wim Hof in the morning, that's fine. It will probably give you a lot of benefits, as well as you can read the Wim Hof method book, and it's all amazing. But I wouldn't recommend breathing like that all the time. Definitely not. You don't want to over breathe, right? Due to all the reasons that we're learning right now. And then there was another person on top of Bohr. His name is Yandel Henderson, and I talked a bit about him in the previous video. And he said that overbreathing has no additional effect, and even if you get a little bit more oxygen, it will just be breathed out. And the less you breathe, the more you can offload. So the slower you breathe, or the less oxygen you breathe, you're able to raise the CO2 levels, and thus better offload that oxygen. And so it can go to tissues, etc. So he actually did an experiment with dogs, right? We saw Horvath who did an experiment with rhesus monkeys, and they showed changes literally in their morphology because of mouth breathing. Well, Henderson did an experiment with dogs, and Yandel Henderson showed that literally when they had less oxygen that they were breathing, their heart rates went way down, and their tissues were way more oxygenated. In fact, those that had so much oxygen, the CO2 level fell down, and the dogs got really anxious, confused, and irritable, and even had higher blood pressure. But when they had less oxygen breathed into them, they felt more peaceful, and they felt less anxiety, and they had less stress, and it reduced the blood pressure. And then, so this shows you the benefits of slow breathing. And Olson, the other participant, did an experiment on himself, and he showed that when he was breathing 6 beats per minute versus 18, his carbon dioxide levels went up by 25% after just like a minute or so. His heart rate went to mid-60s from 75, and blood pressure went from 126 to 121. It literally dropped 5 points over a very small time period. And his oxygen level stayed the same at about 97%. And this is very similar to what Yandel Henderson showed with his dog experiment. And Douillard, which I mentioned, last time where he did the experiment with the bikes, right, in the late 1900s, what he showed was that people who were breathe slowly through their nose were able to last around 10% longer, right? When they were breathing, let's say 14 versus 47 breaths per minute, and they had better like offloading, and so they were able to ride more miles. And the author had the same effect. He was literally able to ride way more miles when he reduced his breathing rate from 20 to 6 when developing air hunger. And his oxygen levels didn't even go down, they actually increased. So this shows that slow breathing, when you maintain that your CO2 level, is great for reducing stress and anxiety and frustration and irritability. And it's actually great for getting more oxygen and actually offloading all of that oxygen. That's why the number didn't go down, because there's better offloading. Although you breathe less, you offload that oxygen better, as Bohr showed of his experiment where he drew blood from animals, and it showed that you get better strippage of that oxygen molecule from hemoglobin. And this is the coolest part. The author also talks about something called kechari, which are slow deep breaths of about 6 seconds inhaling and exhaling, and the tongue is above the palate pointing to the nasal cavity. So it's like this. I don't know if you guys can see me, but the tongue is on top of the palate and pointing to the nasal cavity. 6 seconds you breathe in and out. And a lot of prayers, like for example the mantra Om, does the same, where you inhale for 6 seconds and you vocalize for 6 seconds. A lot of prayers do this. And what's really cool is the University of Pavia in 2001 showed that when the breaths took 5.5 breaths per minute, there were better blood flow to the brain, heart, and nervous system function. So you really have better brain and nervous system function and better cardiovascular efficiency and functioning. And Jorborg and Brown got the same results for their patients with anxiety and depression. So this showed that it's very similar to what these prayers are doing. And they actually got the best results when they literally matched it to 5.5 breaths in and out, just like what the prayers did. 5.5 breaths you inhale and 5.5 breaths you exhale as you vocalize that word, that vocalization. And Jorberg and Brown also found this effective for 9/11 survivors, people who had huge levels of anxiety. And this breathing actually has a special name. It's called coherent breathing. And it can even act a bit like a meditation. And it has the power of a healing prayer. So now you know why prayer heals. So try it out for yourself. Breathe in for 5.5 seconds and breathe out for 5.5 seconds.